He slapped the audit file on the glass table like he was about to bury me with it. Right there in my own foundation office, in front of my staff, my board reports, and the name I built from nothing after he threw me away. My billionaire ex looked me dead in the face and said, "One wrong number, Morel, and this whole place comes down. Tell me the truth. If your ex showed up rich, smug, and ready to destroy your life in heels and spreadsheet season, would you stay classy, or would you accidentally knock over his imported water and act confused?" Before the tea spills, I made a deal with myself that if we hit our next subscriber goal, my dog gets a massive steak dinner. Help a pup out and click subscribe. Costs nothing and makes this whole journey worth it. Sound off in the comments with where you're watching from. Now sit back and enjoy the story. He thought he came to audit my foundation. He had no idea he was walking straight into the two little reasons his whole world was about to fall apart. I did not blink. That was the first thing he noticed, and I know he noticed it because Arden Cole had always watched faces the way other men watch stock prices. He watched for weakness. He watched for nerves. He watched for the tiny crack in a person's voice that told him where to push next. So when he slapped that file down in front of me and I did not blink, his jaw tightened just a little. We were in the main executive office at Vale House Foundation. Full glass wall, polished concrete floors, clean shelves, framed photos of women we had housed, fed, funded, and helped rebuild. The place was quiet in that dangerous way a building gets quiet when people outside the room know something ugly is happening inside it. Arden stood at the long conference table like he owned the floor under it. Expensive charcoal suit, no tie, white shirt open at the collar. Watch that probably cost more than my first apartment. He looked older than the man I had married, but not softer. Time had sharpened him, made him cleaner around the edges, more controlled, more dangerous, and still arrogant enough to walk into my foundation 6 years after our divorce and act like he was the storm. He slid one page out of the file and tapped it once. Restricted housing funds transferred into general emergency response. His voice was calm, too calm. "That is not a small bookkeeping issue, Morel." "No," I said. "It's not." He waited. I let him. He gave me a thin smile. "You're awfully calm for someone whose organization may have just handed me grounds to freeze a major review." I leaned back in my chair. "You didn't come here because of one transfer line, didn't I?" "No," I folded my hands on the desk. "You came here because you saw my name on the audit request and your ego couldn't stay in Atlanta." That landed. Not hard enough to stop him, but enough to remind him that I was not the woman who used to let silence scare her. His gray eyes stayed on mine. Same eyes, same impossible color, same cold, stormy stare that used to make whole rooms shift around him. "Interesting," he said. "You still think this is personal." I laughed once, dry and without humor. "Please. A billionaire man does not leave his empire to personally inspect a mid-sized nonprofit in another city unless he's either bored, petty, or bleeding from some place he refuses to name." His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. More like he hated that line and respected it anyway. "Your confidence is impressive," he said. "My numbers are better." He picked up another page. "We'll see." Outside the office, I could see my director of operations, Janine, pretending to read an email she had probably been staring at for 5 solid minutes. The receptionist kept glancing toward the glass wall, then quickly away every time Arden shifted. Nobody could hear us, but they could feel it. That is the thing about power battles. Even when people do not know the details, they know the temperature changed. Arden turned one more page and spoke without looking up. "When your foundation filed for the East Corridor Expansion Grant, you projected 12-month stabilization for 32 families. Then you amended the spending structure twice. Then you moved capital reserves during Q3. Then this." He tapped the line again. "So tell me why I shouldn't read this as desperation. Because if you had finished the packet instead of rushing to feel superior, you'd know that transfer was approved under the emergency housing relief exception after the flood in South Ward." He glanced up. I continued. 8 families were displaced overnight. We had 48 hours to move them into temporary units. The restricted fund was legally reclassified with board approval, city oversight, and donor notification. Every dollar is documented. His eyes narrowed. That isn't reflected here. It is. I nodded toward the second tab in the binder by his hand. You just haven't opened the right section yet. For half a second he did not move. Then he opened the tab. There it was. Signed approval. Dates. Notes. Cross-references. Supporting attachments. I watched his expression stay perfectly controlled, and that almost made me smile. Almost. Ah, I said softly. There she is. The full story. His gaze flicked up to mine. Don't do that. Do what? That tone. I tilted my head. You mean the one I use when a man walks into my office hoping I'm less competent than I am? He closed the file. The sound cracked through the room. You always did confuse defiance with intelligence. And you always confused control with love. I said it lightly. That was the worst part. Not because it hurt him, because it did not shake me to say it anymore. He stared at me. The building seemed to hold its breath. There are moments when your past walks right up to your present and waits to see if you are still weak in the same places. That was one of those moments. 6 years ago, I might have looked away first. 6 years ago, I might have chosen peace over truth, quiet over dignity, survival over confrontation. But 6 years ago, I did not own this office. 6 years ago, I was still married to the man standing across from me. Back then, my name was on charity gala seating charts and donor brunch invitations, not city contracts and housing policy panels. Back then, I was the polished wife standing half a step to the left of Arden Cole, smiling for cameras while pretending not to notice how often he spoke over me in private. Back then, my dreams were things I explained in soft voices over late dinners, and his were things that arrived like orders. Now he was in my building, at my table, reading my reports, and I had built every inch of this without him. He turned and began walking slowly around the office, studying the walls. A framed article from a local paper, a photo from our winter coat drive, a plaque from the mayor's office, artwork done by kids in our after-school program, the architectural rendering for the new family transition wing. You've done well, he said. I did not answer. He looked back at me. That wasn't an insult. I know. Then why does it sound like you want to argue? Because men like you rarely compliment women like me without attaching a hidden knife to it. He let out a quiet breath through his nose. Still dramatic. No, just trained. That one hit harder. I saw it. He moved back toward the table. This foundation operates at a level higher than I expected. There it is. There what is? The part where you admit you thought I'd fail. He rested both hands on the table and leaned in slightly. I did not think you'd build something like this. Why not? He held my gaze. Because when you left, you had almost nothing. The room went still. Not because he raised his voice. Arden never needed volume. He could bruise with plain facts. But this time, the bruise did not land where he wanted. I stood up slowly from my chair. When I left, I said, I had my name, my mind, my hands, and enough self-respect to stop letting a rich man decide my value. That turned out to be more than enough. Something changed in his face then. Something small and private and quickly buried. He straightened. You think I came here to humiliate you? I know you did. That's convenient. It's accurate. He took a step closer. You vanished. The words were flat, controlled, but under them was heat. I crossed my arms. I divorced you. You disappeared. I left. You left without a conversation. I almost laughed at that. A conversation. That's what we're calling infidelity now. His jaw flexed. We are not doing this. No, I said. You're doing an audit. Remember. He looked away first this time, but only for a second. Then my phone rang. Not my cell. The front desk line on my office extension. I picked it up without taking my eyes off him. Morel. Janine's voice came through low and careful. You asked me to remind you that the donor committee call starts in 20. Thank you. And... She hesitated. Your sister texted the main line. The girls' school may close early because of a pipe issue. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed neutral. Let me know when it's confirmed. Will do. I hung up. Arden had heard enough to catch one thing. The girls. I kept my expression blank. Staff program. Came out smooth. Too smooth. The lie of a woman who had practiced living around landmines. He studied me for a beat longer than I liked. Then he said, "You're hiding something." And there it was. That old cold instinct of his. The one that had built fortunes and ruined dinners. Arden never stopped pulling on threads once he felt one move. I moved toward the side credenza and poured water into a glass. "No," I said. "I'm protecting my time from a man who mistakes suspicion for insight." He came closer. Not enough to touch me. Enough to make the air feel smaller. That tone again. I handed him the glass. "Drink your expensive indignation and keep reading." He did not take it. I set it down. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, in that awful clean voice of his, he said, "Did you ever tell anyone why you really left?" I felt something old and hot move through my chest. "My lawyer. I mean the real reason." I laughed once. "You mean the reason that flatters you? Or the reason that makes you look exactly like the man you were?" His eyes hardened. "You always knew how to turn one wound into a courtroom. And you always knew how to cause one and call it timing." He stepped back from the table. "Fine. Let's stay with the numbers." "Yes," I said. "Please. Because unlike your memory, my records can survive review." For the next 15 minutes, the room turned into war by paperwork. He asked for reserve schedules. I gave him 3 years of them. He questioned donor restrictions. I handed him signed release notices. He pushed on board approval timing. I showed minutes, attachments, and legal review. Every time he thought he found a weak spot, I handed him something cleaner, tighter, more complete. That was the part one wish I could say felt sweet. Didn't. Felt earned. There is a special kind of quiet satisfaction in watching a man realize he can no longer scare you with the kind of pressure that once defined your whole life. That is not revenge. Revenge is loud. Revenge wants applause. This was different. This was watching my own healing sit across from me wearing a $7,000 suit and slowly run out of places to stand. Finally he sat down, opened the binder again, and said, "Who built this reporting structure?" "I did. All of it. I had a finance consultant in year 1. I built the rest." He looked at the system again. "It's good. I know." That almost made him smile again. Almost. Then the office door opened without a knock and Janine stepped in. Face tight. "Sorry." She looked from me to Arden, then back to me. "The school confirmed it. Early release in 40 minutes. I nodded once. "My sister." Trying. She's stuck across town. "I'll handle it." Janine gave me a tiny sympathetic look before leaving. The door clicked shut. Arden's voice was quiet. "You have children." It was not a question. I turned back to the table. "I have a life." That wasn't my question. "No," I said. "It was an attempt to make one." He stood up again. "Morel." I picked up a folder and placed it in front of him. Q4 donor summaries. You were asking about rollover timing. He did not look at the folder. "How many?" My spine went rigid. I kept my face neutral by force. "That is none of your business." His eyes locked on mine. There was a long silence. Then he said, "You're right." And weirdly, that was worse. Because I was ready for pressure. Ready for arrogance. Ready for him to push, corner, demand. I was not ready for restraint. He went back to the file. I checked the time. 37 minutes until the school released Lyra and Noemi. Celeste was still stuck in traffic. My donor committee call was in 12. My ex-husband was in my office trying to crack open my foundation finances while circling the edges of a truth that could wreck the rest of my day, my week, maybe my whole carefully built life. And on top of all that, he had started being calm in a different way. Not kinder. That would have been easier. No, he had started noticing. That was dangerous. I ended the donor call in exactly 9 minutes. Janine sat in on it from the boardroom while I handled it at my desk with Arden 3 feet away reading my audit file in silence. If any of the donors noticed the tension in my voice, They were polite enough not to say so. The moment I ended the call, I grabbed my car keys. I need 45 minutes, I said. He looked up. For school pickup. Yes. I can wait. You can leave. I said I can wait. I held his gaze. You don't belong in my office when I'm not here. Something unreadable moved in his face. Still don't trust me. That one almost pulled a laugh out of me. I picked up my bag. Arden. There are women in my transitional housing program who trust men more than I trust you. And some of them arrived here with black eyes. His face went still. Good. Sometimes truth should sting. I walked to the door, then stopped and looked back. If you're here when I get back, stay out of the personnel files and don't make my staff nervous. I don't make people nervous. I put my hand on the doorknob. That's adorable. Then I left. The drive to the school took 16 minutes. 16 minutes of red lights, crowded intersections, and my own pulse hammering far too hard for something as ordinary as picking up my daughters. But nothing about that day felt ordinary. I parked, hurried inside, and found Lyra and Noemi sitting side by side on a bench outside the front office with their backpacks in their laps. Lyra was swinging one sneaker. Noemi was reading a book that she absolutely was not processing because she looked up the second she saw me. Mom! That one word always reset my whole body. I crouched in front of them. You okay? Lyra nodded. The school pipes are gross. Noemi closed her book. Miss Albright said the ceiling in the art room started leaking. Like a sad movie. Then it's a good thing we escaped. I kissed the top of Noemi's head. Then Lyra's. You two ready to hang out at the office for a little while? Lyra's face lit up. Can we use the good markers? No. Can we ask Ms. Janine for snacks? Yes. Noemi narrowed her eyes at me in that tiny, old soul way she had. You look tense. I smiled despite myself. Thank you for that uninvited report. You do, Lyra added. Your left eyebrow is in business mode. That nearly got me laughing. I took both their hands and led them outside. Well, then my eyebrow and I would love your cooperation this afternoon. On the drive back, the girls chatted about school, a spelling quiz, and whether turtles would enjoy birthday cake if anybody ever asked them politely. I answered where I could, but my mind stayed split wide open, because Vale House was not just my workplace. It was the one place in the world I had built to be safe, and I was about to walk back into it with the two people I had hidden from Arden Cole for 6 years. The parking lot came into view. So did his car. Still there. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Noemi saw it first. Mom! I swallowed. Yeah. Your serious eyebrow got worse. Lyra leaned forward between the seats. Are we walking into drama? Children should not be that accurate. I parked and turned to face them. You are walking into my office for a little while. You're going to stay in the art room with your books and your drawing pads until I finish something important. Lyra squinted. Is this grown-up important or actually important? Both. Noemi studied my face. Is somebody mean here? I should have lied. I should have smiled and brushed it off and told them grown-up things were boring and fine and completely under control. Instead, I heard myself say, very softly, there is someone here I used to know. I need you both to stay close to me today. Okay? The twins looked at each other, then both nodded. I got out of the car, came around, and opened their doors. Each girl took one of my hands, and as we walked toward the glass front entrance of the foundation, I had the strange, horrible feeling that the life I had built was about to split open right down the middle. Because inside that building sat the man who had once demanded a divorce like he was canceling a meeting. And in 10 more steps he was going to look up and see exactly what I had kept from him. The lobby doors slid open with a soft mechanical sigh, and the smell of coffee, printer paper, and lemon cleaner wrapped around us like every other workday. Except it was not every other workday. Janine looked up from the front desk and saw the girls first. Then she saw my face. Then she saw Arden standing through the glass wall of my office with one hand braced on my conference table, reading a file he had no business touching for this long. Her whole expression changed. Not dramatic. Janine did not do dramatic. She did deeply controlled concern in a navy blazer and low heels. I set up the art room, she said carefully. Fresh paper, snacks, juice boxes. Thank you. Lyra gave her a small wave. Do we get the good markers? Janine nodded. Only if you promise not to turn the white wall into your personal mural again. That was one time, Lyra said. It was one unforgettable time, Janine replied. Noemi stayed pressed near my side, eyes already drifting toward the glass office wall. Toward him. Arden had not looked up yet. Good. Maybe I could still get them past the hallway. Maybe I could still buy 5 more minutes. Maybe I could still think. I bent down between the girls. Straight to the art room. No wandering. Lyra gave me the look she reserved for instructions she found deeply unnecessary. We know. No side adventures, I said. Noemi nodded. No side adventures. Janine stepped out from behind the desk. Come on, you two. I've got animal crackers and those tiny cheese squares your mother claims are not dinner. They're not dinner, I said automatically. Lyra took one step toward Janine, then stopped, because at that exact second Arden looked up. There are moments when life does not explode all at once. It goes silent first. So silent you can hear every tiny thing around it. The air vent above reception. A stapler clicking 2 rooms over. The squeak of Lyra's shoe as she shifted her foot. Arden's eyes moved from me to Janine to the 2 little girls standing in my lobby. And stayed there. He did not move. He did not speak. He just looked. I knew the precise second recognition hit him because all the color left his face in one slow, visible drain. The twins had my skin, my mouth, my curls. But their eyes were his. Not close to his. Not similar. His. Same sharp gray. Same impossible storm color that never looked soft even in sunlight. And Noemi, because children are never interested in adult crisis timing, lifted one hand in a shy little wave. Hi! Arden still did not answer. Lyra leaned toward me and whispered, far too loudly, Mom! Is that the mean person? The whole lobby froze. Not a normal freeze. A full body, soul leaving the building freeze. Janine looked at the ceiling. I closed my eyes for half a second. Arden finally blinked. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, Mom! One word. That was all. He had not spoken to the girls. He had repeated what Lyra had called me. Mom. Like the word itself was breaking open in his mouth. Lyra frowned. Yes, that is what I said. Janine, God bless her, stepped in fast. Girls' art room. Right now. Usually that tone worked. Usually. But Noemi had turned fully now, staring at Arden with that quiet, searching way she had when she felt something under the surface and did not yet know its name. You look like us, she said. Nobody breathed. I moved first. I put one hand on each girl's shoulder and steered them gently toward the side hall. Art room. Now. But, Lyra started. Now. They obeyed because I never used that voice unless it mattered. Janine took them from me at the hallway and gave me one look over her shoulder that said, without words, do you need me? I gave the tiniest shake of my head. Not because I did not need her. Because there was no version of help that could fix what had just happened. The girls disappeared into the art room. The hallway door swung halfway shut behind them. Then I turned around. Arden was still standing in my office doorway now, not behind the glass anymore. He must have crossed the room without me hearing him. He looked like someone had lifted the ground out from under him and left him upright only by mistake. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. How old are they? Not a question with a question mark. More like a man trying to survive a fact. I held his gaze. 6. His eyes closed. He did not cover it. Did not pretend. Did not smooth it away. He just stood there with his eyes shut and took the hit. Then he opened them again and said, 6. I said nothing. He took a step forward, then stopped himself like he had reached the edge of something too dangerous to trust. You left pregnant. Yes. The word landed hard between us. Janine had vanished. The receptionist had vanished. It felt like the whole building had moved carefully away from the edge of our disaster and left us standing there alone. Arden looked past me toward the hallway where the girls had gone. My daughters. I swallowed once. Yes. He laughed then. One terrible sound. Not humor. Shock wearing a broken mask. He dragged a hand down his face and turned away from me, pacing 2 short steps toward the lobby window before stopping with both hands on his hips. The old Arden would have gone cold. The old Arden would have sharpened himself into something precise and punishing. This version of him looked wrecked. He turned back. You never told me. And you never gave me a reason to. His face tightened. That is not enough. It was for me. You had no right. I took 1 step toward him, voice low so it would not carry. Do not come into my building, try to tear apart the thing I built with my own bare hands, and then start talking to me about rights. You kept my children from me. My children, I snapped. The children I carried alone. The children I gave birth to alone. The children I stayed up with through fevers, nightmares, school forms, stomach bugs, and rent checks while you were out building your name on magazine covers and billion-dollar panels. His jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard his teeth hit. You should have told me. Should I? I laughed, but there was no amusement in it. Should I have called while I was throwing up every morning and said, Hi Arden, funny story. I know you're sleeping with a woman from your own acquisitions team, but congratulations, you're also going to be a father. He flinched. Good. I had carried that sentence in my blood for 6 years. I would have been there, he said. You were barely there when I was your wife. That is not the same thing. No, I said. It's worse. He stared at me. There it was again, that terrible split inside him. Anger, grief, shock, pride, loss. The part of him that wanted to accuse and the part of him that already knew accusing me would not bring back 1 bedtime, 1 birthday, 1 first day of school. His voice came out lower. What are their names? I hated how much that question hurt. Lyra and Noemi. He repeated them slowly, like he was placing stones in his own hands. Lyra, Noemi. I crossed my arms because suddenly I needed to hold my own ribs together. They know they have a father who lives far away. His eyes came back to mine. That's all. Yes. He looked toward the art room again. Do they know who I am? No. A muscle jumped in his cheek. And what was the plan? You were just going to keep hiding them forever. I could have lied. Could have said I was waiting for the right time. Could have polished it into some answer that sounded strategic and noble and maternal. But this man had already taken too much truth from me for me to start dressing it up now. I don't know what the plan was, I said. At first the plan was survival. Then the plan was diapers. Then speech therapy for Lyra because she talked so fast she tripped over half her own words. Then it was trying to build a payroll while Noemi had night terrors every time it thundered. Then school admissions. Then expansion grants. Then keeping the lights on. Then trying to make sure they never felt the kind of instability I felt with you. He stared at me without blinking. I kept going because now that I had started, I could not stop. You want the ugly truth. Fine. I did not tell you because I did not trust you to love them in a way that wasn't about ownership. I did not trust your family to turn my daughters into a legacy project. I did not trust your money not to swallow every boundary I had. And I sure as hell did not trust the man who handed me divorce like a scheduling update. Silence. Deep. Ringing. Final. Then, very quietly, he said, You think I would have treated them like assets? I looked him dead in the face. I think you treated me like one. So yes, that one went in deep. He stepped back like he needed more room to breathe. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then from the hallway came Lyra's voice, bright and clear as church bells. Ms. Janine, where are the glitter pens? Janine answered something too soft to make out. Arden's face changed again. It was one thing to hear the word daughters. It was another to hear their actual voices. Small, alive, real. His children had voices. His children existed in the next room. His children had favorite snacks and school backpacks and opinions about glitter pens. I saw that knowledge move through him in waves. He said, without looking at me, I missed 6 years. Yes. His throat worked once. 6 years. Yes. He laughed again, but this time it sounded closer to pain. You are really going to make me say it out loud. I'm not making you do anything. He looked at me finally, and every polished edge was gone. I missed everything. The sentence should not have touched me. It did anyway, because there are some griefs that stay human no matter who carries them. I did not soften, but I did not pretend not to understand. Yes, I said. You did. He lowered himself slowly into one of the lobby chairs like his knees had decided for him. My billionaire ex-husband, who once acted like every room should rise to greet him, sat in the reception chair under the donor recognition wall and looked like a man who had just been told his life had been happening somewhere else. For one wild second, I thought he might cry. He did not. He just sat there with both forearms braced on his thighs and stared at the floor. I stayed standing, because I had spent too many years living under his weather to sit down inside it now. Finally he said, "Did anyone know? My sister. That's all. My lawyer later. A doctor. People who mattered." He gave one bitter little nod. "Not me. No." He leaned back, looked up at the ceiling, and laughed once more under his breath like he hated the sound of his own reality. "Of all the things I expected when I walked in here today, you expected to humiliate me." His eyes cut back to mine. "I expected answers. No, you expected leverage." He did not deny it, and that was Arden's version of honesty. He never admitted things cleanly. He just stopped arguing them when he knew the lie would insult both people in the room. A minute passed, then another, and because the world has a cruel sense of timing, my receptionist came halfway out of the front office with a packaged clipboard in her hand, saw both of us, and almost backed into a ficus. "Sorry." She looked mortified. "Delivery signature." I took the clipboard, signed it, handed it back. "Thank you, Teresa." She fled like a woman escaping a crime scene. Arden rubbed a hand over his mouth. "This is unbelievable." "No," I said. "It's very believable. You just never imagined a future that existed outside your field of vision." He looked tired for the first time since I had seen him again. Not physically tired, soul tired, and I hated that I noticed. "I need to talk to them," he said. "No." His head snapped up. "No. Morel." "No." I stepped closer and lowered my voice. "You do not get ambushed into fatherhood and then walk into the art room because your conscience finally found a pulse." His expression darkened a shade. "They are my daughters. And they are 6. I held his gaze. "They are not a board meeting. They are not an acquisition. They are not a press conference where you can recover from bad timing with the right tone. They are children. My children. And you will not bring your shock into that room until I say they are ready." He stood up again. The old force came back into him a little. Not all the way. Enough to remind me who he had always been. "You do not decide that alone. I already did. 6 years ago. That was not your call to make. It became my call the second you proved I was safer without you. We were close now. Too close. The kind of close where one wrong sentence can either become a kiss or a war. This was not going to be a kiss." His voice dropped. "You are still angry." I almost smiled. "That your brilliant conclusion." "No." His eyes moved over my face, searching in that way he always had when he wanted the truth beneath the performance. "My brilliant conclusion is that anger is easier for you than guilt." That one hit hard, because some part of me did feel guilty. Not for leaving, never for leaving, but for the years, for the birthdays, for the first missing tooth, for every moment those girls might someday ask me to explain, and the fact that he saw that almost made me hate him again. So I said the cruelest truthful thing I had. "You know what is easier for me than guilt? Peace. The kind I got the day I no longer had to wonder who you were texting under the table." His face went dead still. There was the old wound, cleanly reopened. Good. Maybe that was ugly of me. Maybe I did not care. He looked toward the art room and then back at me. "I am not leaving without hearing from you what happens next." I crossed my arms again. "What happens next is you finish your audit, you issue whatever report your bruised ego can survive, and then you go back to Atlanta while I decide how to tell my daughters the truth." His stare sharpened. "Your daughters?" Did I stutter? You cannot keep speaking like I do not exist in this. I kept us alive while you did not exist in it. His voice rose then. Not loud. Arden almost never got loud. But enough to crack. You do not get to weaponize my ignorance like I chose it. The hallway went quiet. Janine must have heard the shift because she appeared again, fast and careful, stopping just short of the lobby. Everything in her face asked the same question. Are you safe? I looked at her and said, Can you keep the girls in the art room another few minutes? Her eyes flicked to Arden. Of course. Lyra's voice floated faintly from inside. Why are we in hiding? Janine answered, You are not in hiding. You are in elite creative confinement. Lyra accepted that, apparently. Janine disappeared again. I looked back at Arden. This is exactly why, I said. You raise your voice one shade and the whole building feels it. You do not walk gently into spaces, Arden. You arrive in them. Something in him seemed to crack wider. Then he said the last thing I expected. I know. I froze. He looked straight at me. I know. No defense. No spin. No pride. Just that. And somehow that was worse than if he had fought me. He took a slow breath. I know what I was like. I know what I made you carry. I know I do not get to walk in here and act like time owes me something. But do not stand there and tell me to go back to Atlanta like nothing is in that room for me. His voice dropped lower. My daughters are in that room. The words came out ragged. Human. For 1 second, I saw not my ex-husband, not the billionaire, not the cold man from the magazines and deal tables, just a father arriving 6 years late. And I hated that my heart was still human enough to feel that. I looked away first, toward the wall of framed photos by reception. Women holding apartment keys, kids in winter coats, families who had stepped into Vale House broken and left steadier. I built this place because I knew what it felt like when a life could change in one room and nobody around you understood the damage. Maybe that was why I straightened my shoulders and made myself sound colder than I felt. You want a next step? Yes. You'll get one. He did not breathe. Tomorrow, I said. Not today. Today I take my daughters home. I figure out what to say. I decide what they need. Tomorrow I tell you whether they are willing to meet you. His eyes searched mine. You would really let me meet them? Do not mistake permission for forgiveness. I didn't. Good. He nodded once. Then, after a long beat, and the audit. I almost laughed from the sheer insanity of that question existing now. The audit, I said, will be finished by your team, not by you. His jaw tightened. I'm not handing this off. You are. Morel. No, I stepped closer and dropped my voice until it barely carried. You do not get to use a compliance review as cover to invade my life. That game is over. If this audit continues, it continues at a professional distance. Through your team. Through documents. Through email. Not like this. We stood there for a long second. Then he nodded. A small one. Barely there. But real. All right. I had won that point. And weirdly, it did not feel like winning. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a card, and set it on the front desk. My direct number. I did not touch it. If they have questions, he said. If you need medical history, family history, anything. His voice almost failed on the word anything. I looked at the card but kept my hands at my sides. I already know your family history, I said. Arrogance. Control. Expensive silence. That should have made him cold again. Instead, he gave a broken half-smile that barely existed and said, Yeah, I hate that that hurt me more than anger would have. The hallway door opened. Not wide, just enough. And Noemi peeked out. Her curls were slightly wild from leaning against the art room wall. She still held a purple marker in one hand. She looked at me first, then at Arden, then at both of us together. In a soft voice, she asked, Mom, are we going home now? I moved immediately. Yes, baby. But Arden had already gone completely still again. Noemi looked at him with solemn curiosity. Then she said the sentence that finished what the day had started. You look sad. That was the end of the room. Not the end of the conversation. Not the end of the damage. But the end of whatever mask he still had left. Because children do not say things to wound. They say them because truth is sitting right there on your face. Arden looked at my daughter. His daughter. And for the first time since I had known him, there was no armor anywhere on him at all. Noemi had not meant to break him. That was the cruel grace of children. They did not know where adults kept their weakest bones, so they touched them without fear. Arden opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. A little, he said. His voice was so different now that even Lyra, who had slipped into the hallway behind her sister without any of us noticing, tilted her head. You don't sound mean anymore, she said. I shut my eyes for one heartbeat. Of course she had followed. Of course there was no such thing as one twin peeking without the other eventually arriving like backup. Girls, I said, gentle but firm. Coats, we're leaving. Neither moved. Lyra looked at Arden the way she looked at hard math problems or suspicious casseroles. Noemi still held the purple marker. Cap missing. Her fingers stained violet. Arden did not take a step toward them. He did not kneel. He did not perform gentleness like a man trying to win a room. He just stood there, hands empty at his sides, and looked at them with the expression of someone who had spent his whole life walking into meetings prepared for anything except wonder and punishment arriving in matching backpacks. Noemi spoke first. Are you the person who upset Mom? Straight to the throat. Janine, somewhere inside the art room, made a sound that was either a cough or a swallowed prayer. Arden's eyes flicked to me for half a second, then back to Noemi. Yes, he said. My breath caught. He could have dodged, softened it, put a grown-up spin on it. He did none of that. Lyra folded her arms. That's bad. Yes, he said again. It was. Noemi absorbed that quietly. Then she asked, Are you still upsetting her now? I stepped in before he could answer. We are leaving. But Arden said very softly, I hope not. That hit somewhere I did not want touched. Lyra glanced up at me. Mom, what? Is this why your eyebrow is doing all that? I almost laughed, which felt like betrayal. Coats, I said again. This time they moved. Noemi padded back toward the art room to get her backpack. Lyra followed, but not before giving Arden one final suspicious look like a tiny bodyguard filing a private report. The second they were out of sight, I turned on him. You do not answer questions from my children unless I decide this conversation is happening. He didn't argue. That should have calmed me. Didn't. Instead he said, I wasn't going to lie to them. You don't get points for honesty arriving 6 years late. His face tightened, but he took it. Fair enough. Janine came out with both girls' backpacks and 2 jackets draped over her arm. She handed them to me with the kind of stillness people use around active power lines. Cars still up front, she said. Thank you. Her eyes flicked to Arden and then back to me. Call me tonight. Not if you need me. Not if things get bad. Just call me. Because she knew they already were. I will. The twins came back out. Lyra was wearing one sleeve of her cardigan and none of the other. Noemi had somehow managed to put on her coat with one pocket inside out. Ordinary little messes. Ordinary little girls. Nothing about them should have been standing in the same room as a man like Arden Cole, and yet there we were. I took their hands. Say goodbye to Ms. Janine. Bye, Ms. Janine. Then Lyra looked at Arden. The room froze again. She did not say goodbye. She just studied him with a serious, curious little face and then asked the one question I had hoped I would have until tonight, tomorrow, maybe never, to prepare for. Do you know our dad? The silence afterward was so deep I could hear the hum of the lights. Janine looked like she might actually pass out. Noemi's eyes moved from Lyra to me to Arden. My whole body went cold. Arden didn't answer. That was somehow worse. His face changed in a way I cannot fully explain. Like every instinct in him was fighting at once. Tell the truth. Protect them. Protect himself. Protect me. Too late. All too late. I crouched down fast, putting myself between them and the rest of the room. That is a question for later, I said carefully. Not here. Lyra frowned. Because of office rules. Yes, I said. Because of office rules. Children accept strange things when your tone says this matters. Noemi nodded first. Lyra took a beat longer, then sighed in dramatic surrender. Fine. I stood and started toward the door with both girls. Then Arden spoke behind me. Morel. I did not turn around. What? A pause. Then, tomorrow. Not a question. Not an order either. More like a man trying to hold onto the only certainty he had left. I kept my hand on the lobby door and said, I said tomorrow. Then I walked out. The cold hit us first. Then the city noise. Then the relief of being outside where the walls weren't holding their breath with us. I buckled the girls in with hands that felt steady only because mothers do not get to fall apart when car seats and afternoon traffic are involved. Lyra chattered almost immediately about whether she could have breakfast for dinner. Noemi stayed quieter than usual, staring out the window as we pulled away from the foundation. I made it 3 blocks before Lyra asked, So who was that? And there it was. No dramatic music. No perfect setup. Just a red light, a left turn signal ticking, and my 6-year-old daughter asking the question that had finally caught up to me. A man I used to know, I said. Lyra made a face visible in the rearview mirror. That is not a real answer. It's the answer you're getting right now. He looked at us weird. Lyra, I said. What? He did. Noemi spoke without looking away from the window. Not weird. I glanced at her in the mirror. What then? She thought about it. Like when I found my bird book after I thought I lost it forever. That one landed so softly it hurt more than if she had shouted. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. Nobody spoke for the rest of the drive. At home, Celeste was already there, standing in my kitchen in jeans and a sweater with one of my mugs in her hand like she had every right to occupy my panic before I even named it. The girls ran to her the second they got in. Aunt Cece. She bent and hugged them both, then looked over their heads straight at me. Her face changed instantly. That was the thing about Celeste. She never needed a long explanation. She had watched me leave my marriage with one suitcase and swollen eyes and a silence so deep it made everybody around me whisper. She knew what my face looked like before I said a word. Homework first, she told the girls. Then cartoons. Lyra groaned. Noemi accepted the sentence like a tiny judge. The second they were halfway down the hall, Celeste came to me. He knows. I nodded. How? He saw them. Her whole body went still. At the foundation. Yes. She put the mug down before she dropped it. Morel. I know. No, I don't think you do, because if I start screaming now, the girls will hear it. I know. She lowered her voice to a sharp whisper. How much does he know? That they're his. Celeste swore under her breath and paced once across the kitchen. Did he say anything? A lot. Anything useful? No. That was not entirely true, but it was the truth I could live with saying out loud. Celeste crossed her arms. What now? I leaned both hands on the kitchen island and looked down at the bowl of clementines like they might offer policy guidance. He wants to meet them. She laughed once. Not kindly. Of course he does. I said tomorrow I'd tell him what happens next. Why would you give him that? Because he was standing in my lobby looking like someone had reached into his chest and pulled the wiring out with their bare hands, and the girls were 10 feet away, and I had to say something. Celeste's face softened just a fraction, then hardened again. He should hurt. He does. Good. I closed my eyes. The problem was I agreed, and somehow that did not make this easier. From the living room came Lyra's voice. Aunt Cece, if homework is oppression, does that count as a family emergency? Celeste called back. No, but bad grades do. Then she turned back to me. Tell me everything. So I did. The audit. The file on the table. His arrogance. The transfer line he thought would ruin us. The way he kept circling the truth before the girls arrived. The look on his face when Noemi said he looked like us. The way he sat in that reception chair like a man who had finally discovered there were consequences wealth couldn't negotiate. Celeste listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. And the girls. They know something happened. Do they know what? No. Do you? That made me look up. She held my gaze. Do you know what you're going to tell them? I opened my mouth. Closed it. She nodded. That's what I thought. It was nearing dinner by the time the girls finished homework. Lyra wanted pancakes shaped like stars. Noemi wanted tomato soup and half a grilled cheese because, and I quote, a full one feels emotionally aggressive tonight. Celeste laughed so hard at that she had to sit down. I moved through the kitchen on habit. Butter in the pan. Bread on the counter. Soup heating low. Hands busy so my mind would not drown. The girls sat at the table coloring while they waited. Then Noemi looked up and said, Mom. Yes. Was that man from the office sad because of us? I kept spreading butter over bread. No, baby. You sure? No. That answer came too fast. Too flat. Lyra watched me closely. She had Arden's eyes and my tendency to go very still when something important was being hidden. He looked like he wanted to say something, she said. I flipped a sandwich in the pan. People often want to say things. That is not an answer either, she muttered. Celeste jumped in. You two ask better questions than cable news. What is cable news? Noemi asked. A reason grown-ups need naps, Celeste said. That distracted them for maybe 20 seconds. Then Lyra came back to it because of course she did. Is he your old boyfriend? I nearly dropped the spatula. Celeste choked on absolutely nothing. Noemi gasped. Lyra. What? I'm asking. I turned off the stove and faced them fully. Finish coloring, I said, which in our house meant, this topic is not for public handling while grilled cheese is involved. They both recognized the tone. They bent back over their paper. But the air had changed. After dinner, I ran bathwater while Celeste loaded the dishwasher. The girls argued about pajamas, then about which stuffed animal got prime bedtime placement, then about whether 2 chapters of reading counted as oppression. By the time I tucked them in, the world had narrowed back down to the familiar holy routine of blankets, forehead kisses, and the ridiculous weight of being loved by small people who thought you knew what you were doing. Lyra caught my wrist before I could stand up from her bedside. Mom. Yes. Are you okay? Children always asked it at the worst possible time. I smoothed her curls back from her forehead. I'm tired. That's not what I asked. Across the room, Noemi watched me over the edge of her blanket. I sat back down on the rug between their beds. There it was. The moment I had been outrunning for 6 years. Not the legal conversation. Not the one with Arden. This one. The one where 2 little girls looked at me with total trust and I had to decide how much truth belonged in a child's nightlight world. I'm okay, I said slowly. Something surprising happened today, and I'm still thinking about the best way to explain it. Lyra nodded as if she had suspected exactly that. Noemi's voice came small and sleepy. Is it about him? I should have asked which him. I didn't. Yes. Neither girl spoke. I could hear Celeste moving around in the kitchen. The cabinet door closing. Water running. The ordinary sounds of a house continuing while a life changes upstairs. I chose my next words carefully. The man from the office is someone important from before you were born. Lyra's eyes widened just a little. Like grandma important or trouble important. Celeste coughed loudly in the kitchen. I almost smiled. Both, I said. That answer sat in the room for a moment. Then Noemi asked, is he the faraway dad? There are sentences that make your whole body go quiet around them. That was one. I looked from one twin bed to the other. At 6 years old, they were still more softness than edge, more trust than caution. I had always known this day would come. I had imagined it 100 different ways. None of those ways looked like a Tuesday night with dinosaur pajamas and wet hair and one sock inexplicably hanging from the lamp. But life does not care what scenes you rehearsed. Yes, I said. Lyra sat straight up. What? Noemi's eyes filled. Not with tears yet, just shock. The man from the office, I said again, because now there was no clean way except straight through. Is your father? Silence. Then Lyra said exactly what I should have expected. The mean one. Noemi whispered. Oh, I stayed where I was on the rug, looking up at them so they would not feel cornered by the size of my feelings. Yes, I said. That man. Lyra looked offended on my behalf before she looked anything else. You said our dad lived far away. He does. You did not say he was office mean. That was not the first fact I planned to lead with. Even now, that got a tiny, unwilling breath of laughter out of Celeste in the hall. Noemi's voice was quiet. Did he know? The house seemed to lean in around us. No, I said. He didn't know about you until today. Lyra's eyebrows pulled together. How? And there it was. The next cliff. How much do you put in a child's hands? How much betrayal? How much protection? How much adult failure can little hearts hold without starting to believe it belongs to them? I drew in a slow breath. That, I said softly, is a longer story. Lyra looked ready to demand it immediately. Noemi looked like she wasn't sure she wanted it at all. So I did the only honest thing I could. And I promise I will tell you more, but not all at once. Okay. Neither answered right away. Then Noemi nodded first. Lyra followed, but with obvious reluctance. Okay, she said, but I have concerns. I know you do. Many concerns. I know. Noemi twisted a corner of her blanket around her finger. Is he going to come here? Yes. When? I don't know yet. That was partly true. What I knew was that Arden would absolutely not let tomorrow pass quietly. What I did not know was whether I was about to let him into this house, this life, this delicate new truth. Lyra stared at me with startling seriousness. Do we have to like him? I blinked. Celeste, now leaning in the doorway, went very still. And I said the most important thing I had maybe ever said to my daughters. No. They both looked surprised. I kept going. You do not have to feel any certain way just because someone is family. You do not owe instant trust to anyone. Not because they are rich. Not because they are sorry. Not because they have a title. You get to take your time with your own heart. Celeste looked at me then with that expression sisters get when they remember exactly who you had to become to say something like that out loud. Noemi absorbed it quietly. Lyra nodded like she was signing a treaty. Okay, she said. That seems fair. It is fair. Noemi asked the question I knew was coming but still wasn't ready for. Why are you not together? I held very still. Because how do you explain betrayal to children without handing them a map of bitterness they do not need yet? Sometimes, I said carefully, grown-ups love each other in ways that are not healthy enough to build a home. And when that happens, staying apart is kinder than staying together. Lyra frowned. That sounds like a school principal answer. Celeste made a strangled noise that might have been laughter. I gave Lyra a look. You are deeply difficult. I get it from somebody, she said. Arden's eyes. My mouth. God help me. Noemi looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she asked, Did he make you cry? I looked down. That was answer enough. When I looked back up, Lyra's whole face had changed. Not childish outrage anymore. Something steadier. Protective. Fierce. Oh, she said. Noemi's eyes finally filled. Not because children fully understand heartbreak. Because they understand pain on faces they love. I stood then and moved to her bed first, sitting carefully at the edge as she reached for me. I held her until her breathing slowed. Then I kissed Lyra's forehead, though she pretended she was not leaning into it. When I finally turned out the light, Lyra's voice came from the dark. If he comes here, I'm watching him. I know, I said. Noemi added sleepily. Me too. I know. Downstairs, Celeste was waiting at the kitchen island with 2 mugs of tea I did not want and desperately needed. She handed me one. Well, I said back. You told them. Yes. How bad? I blew on the tea. Lyra has formed a review panel. Noemi is thinking in watercolor. Celeste nodded. Makes sense. We stood in silence for a moment. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't need to look. I knew, but I did anyway. One text. Arden, I'm not asking for tonight, but but I am asking you not to make me wait long enough for them to think I chose distance. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Celeste leaned in just enough to read it. Then she let out a slow breath through her nose. He's got nerve. Yes. You answering. I looked toward the ceiling, toward the 2 bedrooms at the end of the hall where my daughters were trying to sleep inside a world that no longer looked the same as it had this morning. Then I looked back at the message, and I typed exactly 8 words. Tomorrow, noon. You come alone and you listen. I stared at it 1 second longer, then hit send. I barely slept. That was not dramatic. It was math. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a different version of tomorrow. Arden in my doorway with that same ruined look on his face. Lyra crossing her arms and deciding in under 4 seconds whether he deserved oxygen. Noemi asking one soft question that would slice the whole room open. Or worse, Arden walking in trying to act composed, polished, careful, like grief could be managed if he picked the right tone and expensive enough shoes. And beneath all of that was the one thought I could not shake. He had finally met the only people in this world whose opinion he could not outspend. That changes a man. Or it exposes him. Sometimes I think stories like this hit so hard because most of us know what it feels like to hold a life together with one hand while the past pounds on the door with the other. If that has ever been you, if you've ever had to protect your peace the hard way, subscribe and support this channel. Truly, it helps more than you know. These stories take heart, and so does building a space where people feel seen in them. And if you're still here with me in this one, thank you. That kind of support matters. By 10 the next morning, I had already reorganized my kitchen pantry, answered 6 work emails, ignored 3 from Janine telling me not to come into the office unless the building was on fire, and changed my outfit twice. Celeste noticed all of it. You're spiraling in business casual, she said from my kitchen stool, drinking coffee like she had all the time in the world. I'm dressing. You changed earrings twice. The first pair was too sharp. The second pair were hoops, Morel. If hoops are too aggressive, you're not dressing. You're emotionally negotiating with jewelry. I glared at her while buttoning the cuff of a cream blouse I had owned long enough to trust. Why are you still here? Because if your billionaire disaster walks into this house and says one stupid thing, I want a front row seat. He's coming alone. Celeste lifted one eyebrow. That was not my question. From the hallway, Lyra called out, "Can we have toast before feelings?" Celeste pointed toward the hall. See, even your children know this is a high-carb situation. I should have laughed more than I did. But nerves were making everything inside me feel overtuned. Noemi and Lyra had been quiet at breakfast. Not upset. Not exactly. Thinking. That was almost harder. Lyra had eaten cereal with the expression of someone planning a cross-examination. Noemi had spent 5 full minutes staring at the condensation on her orange juice glass like the answer to family crisis might be hidden in water droplets. They were both dressed now. Lyra in soft blue leggings and a yellow shirt with one tiny glittering star near the collar. Noemi in a cardigan she insisted made her feel thoughtful. Children said things like that and did not understand the damage. At 11:23, my phone buzzed. Arden. Outside. Of course he was early. Of course he was not the kind of man who arrived exactly on time to the first meeting with the daughters he had not known existed until yesterday. Men like Arden believed early was respect, control, and strategy all at once. I looked at the message, then at Celeste, then at the hallway where the girls were whispering in that intense twin way that always made it feel like they had formed a private legal team. "You want me here or gone?" Celeste asked. "Here." She nodded once. No speech. No performance. Just here. That was love too. I opened the front door before he could ring the bell. Arden stood on the porch holding nothing. No flowers. No toys. No oversized dramatic apology gift bag. Thank God. Just himself in a dark coat and plain shirt, looking like a man who had slept about as well as I had. We stood there for a second in the cool noon air. He glanced over my shoulder into the house, then back at me. "I said alone." I told him. "I am alone." "Good." His gaze rested on my face a fraction longer than I wanted it to. You look tired. I almost smiled at the nerve. So do you. That strangely got the smallest real thing out of him. Not a smile. More like the memory of one. Fair. I stepped aside. He walked in carefully. That was the first thing the girls noticed. Not his clothes. Not his face. Not even the fact that he was tall enough to shift the room around him. It was the care. Arden, for all his power, had always moved like a man who expected spaces to accommodate him. Boardrooms, cars, hotel lobbies, charity galas, even silence. But when he crossed my threshold, he moved like a man entering a church he did not feel worthy of. Lyra and Noemi stood in the living room side by side, waiting. Celeste sat on the arm of the sofa like a warning label in human form. Arden saw all three of them and stopped. Nobody spoke first. Then Noemi, because softness is sometimes the bravest thing in a room, said, "Hi." Arden swallowed. "Hi." Lyra looked him up and down. "You're less mean in our house." Celeste made a sound suspiciously close to a laugh. Arden nodded once. "That's probably true." "Why?" Lyra asked. "Because you are 6 and ask the question every adult dodges," I thought. But Arden answered, "Because I'm trying very hard to get this right." Lyra considered that. Noemi looked at me. "Can we sit?" "Yes, baby." They all sat in the living room. The girls on the rug. Celeste on the sofa arm. Arden in the far chair like he knew better than to choose comfort. I took the other chair close enough to intervene, far enough not to make this feel like a trap. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the ticking of the mantel clock. Then Lyra said, "Mom told us you're our father." Straight to it. Noemi folded her hands in her lap. Arden looked at both of them, and I watched every shield he had strained against that sentence. "Yes," he said. Lyra narrowed her eyes. "You sure?" The man had built companies, negotiated mergers, handled journalists and hostile investors and board rebellions. And yet nothing in his life had prepared him for my daughter. "Yes," he said again. And this time there was a tiny break in his voice that made even Lyra stop looking combative for a second. Noemi asked, "How come you didn't know us?" I had prepared for this. Prepared my own version of the answer. Simple, gentle, age-appropriate. Arden answered before I had to. "Because your mother and I were already apart before she knew she was going to have you." That was careful. True enough to stand. Lyra leaned back on her hands. "So she found out and then didn't tell you." Celeste looked at the ceiling like she was seeking divine patience. I said, "Lyra, what? We're doing truth." Arden's eyes flicked to mine, then back to her. "Yes, just yes. No defense. No spin." I felt that in my chest. Lyra blinked at the bluntness of it. She had clearly expected more argument, more edges, more adult performance. "So she didn't want you around," she said. The room chilled. Noemi's face changed immediately. "Lyra, what?" "I'm asking." Noemi looked upset on my behalf. Celeste looked ready to throw a decorative object. I opened my mouth. Arden spoke first. "Your mother did what she thought would keep you safe. That stopped all of us." His gaze stayed on the girls. "And I gave her reasons to think that." I did not move. Celeste slowly lowered the mug she had apparently been preparing to weaponize. Lyra's voice got quieter. "Like what reasons?" There it was. The road I had been dreading. I felt my whole body tense, but Arden did not look at me for rescue. He kept his eyes on the twins and said, "I hurt your mother, badly, before you were born." Noemi asked, "Did you say sorry?" He gave the tiniest, most miserable exhale. "Not well enough." That one hit so hard the room seemed to go thin around it. Lyra looked at me. "Did he make you cry?" I should have lied. Again. For the 100th time in motherhood, I should have put on a cleaner answer, something neat and protective and easy to file away. Instead I said, "Yes." Noemi looked down at her hands. Lyra stared at Arden with all the outrage her little body could hold. He took it. He did not argue. Did not say it was complicated. Did not ask for context or fairness or nuance. He just sat there and let two 6-year-old girls see him as the man who made their mother cry. And that, more than any speech, was the first honest thing I had seen from him in years. Noemi lifted her head again. Do you have other kids? Yes. A son, I added gently. His name is James. Lyra's eyes widened. We have a brother. Arden nodded. Yes. Noemi asked. Is he little? He's 3. Does he know us? Arden shook his head. Not yet. Lyra frowned. That seems messy. Celeste gave up and laughed outright. I rubbed my forehead. Thank you, legal counsel. Lyra ignored me. Do you live in a giant house? Arden paused. I live in a large house. Noemi? Lyra whispered, as if this confirmed everything. Noemi whispered back. I heard the large part. Arden did not smile, but warmth moved through his face for a second. I noticed because I hated myself a little for noticing. Then Noemi asked the one that mattered most. Why do you want to know us now? He went completely still. The room did too. Because children know when something is finally real. They do not always know why, but they know. Arden leaned forward slightly, forearms resting on his knees, hands clasped like he was holding himself together. Because I should have known you from the beginning, he said. And I didn't. And when I found out you were real, nothing in me wanted to stay away. Simple. Plain. No polish. Noemi took that in with the same solemn care she gave new books and wounded birds. Lyra was not so easily moved. But you were mean first. He nodded. Yes. At Mom's office. Yes. You were trying to get her in trouble. He looked at me then, just once, and there was no defense in it. Only the humiliation of truth. Yes. Lyra crossed her arms. That's terrible timing. It was so brutally accurate that Celeste barked out a laugh into her coffee. Even I nearly smiled. Arden did not. He just said, You're right. Noemi studied him. Then, in a very soft voice, Are you sorry because we're here? Or sorry because Mom was alone? That one nearly took the room apart. Arden shut his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were bright in a way I had never seen on him before. Both, he said. And more than that. Noemi did not speak. Lyra did not interrupt. So he kept going. I am sorry because your mother had to carry things she should never have carried alone. I am sorry because I became someone she could not trust. I am sorry because that cost me 6 years with you. And I am sorry because no matter what I do next, I cannot give those years back. Celeste looked away. I kept my face still by force. The girls sat quiet, absorbing a truth bigger than they could fully hold yet. Finally Lyra asked, If you're our dad, why didn't you know we liked star pancakes? A strange sound escaped Arden. Half laugh, half grief. I should have. You really should have, she said. Noemi added, And that I don't like loud hand dryers. He nodded. I should have known that too. And that Lyra talks a lot when she's worried. I do not, Lyra protested. Noemi turned to her. You absolutely do. Only because somebody has to keep things moving. Arden looked at them like he was trying to learn an entire language at once. Then, very quietly, he said, Tell me more. That changed something. Not everything. Nothing clean or immediate like that. But something. Because he did not rush. Did not perform fatherhood. Did not start making promises large enough to sound fake. He just sat there and listened while two 6-year-old girls explained themselves to him. Lyra informed him that she hated peas, loved space, and did not trust people who answered questions too slowly. Noemi explained that she liked storms from inside the house but not outside, that books felt different if they smelled old, and that soup was better when eaten with grilled cheese triangles, not squares, because triangles understand comfort. Arden listened to every word like it was law. Sometimes he asked small questions. What books? What storms? What kind of pancakes? What makes school feel good? Nothing too big. Nothing too forceful. Just enough to tell them he was not collecting facts. He was trying to know them. And against my own will I could feel the room changing. Not softening. Rearranging. At one point Lyra held up 2 fingers and said, Important question. Arden nodded. Okay. If you become around more, do we have to wear itchy dresses to rich events? I laughed before I could stop myself. A real one. The sound startled all of us. Arden looked at me for one quick second, then back at Lyra. No. No at all, or no unless there are tiny sandwiches. No at all. That's your strongest answer so far, she said. Celeste put down her mug. I'm getting emotional damage from this child. Noemi had been drawing lazy circles on the rug with one finger. Now she looked up and asked, if we don't know how to feel yet, is that rude? Arden's whole face changed again. No, he said immediately. That is not rude. She nodded. Okay. And I felt something in me unclench. Because I had told them that the night before. That they did not owe instant trust. That they were allowed to take their time with their own hearts. And here he was, giving them the same permission. That mattered. More than I wanted it to. An hour passed before I noticed how long it had been. No screaming. No grand declarations. No power games. Just truth moving carefully through a room full of people who had all, in different ways, been hurt by waiting too long. Then Lyra asked, do you have pictures of us? Arden went still. No, he said. She frowned. That's sad. Yes. I looked away. Noemi glanced at me. Mom has lots. Of course I had lots. Boxes. Albums. School portraits. Bathtime grins. Popsicle faces. First lost tooth. Finger paint. Pumpkin patch. Christmas pajamas. The whole hidden little universe of them. Arden's eyes found mine for just a second. And this time there was no accusation in them. Just the raw knowledge that I had lived an entire country of ordinary love without him. Noemi, merciful and merciless all at once, asked, do you want some? Arden looked back at her like he had forgotten how speech worked. Yes, he said finally. Very much. Lyra stood up on the rug. I can get one. Before I could stop her, she was off down the hallway toward the den where we kept framed photos on the low shelf by the books. I stood halfway out of my chair. Lyra, I know where they are. Noemi followed because of course she did. Then it was just me, Arden, and Celeste for the first time since he arrived. Celeste leaned back against the sofa and said, say one stupid thing and I will absolutely remember where the heavy lamp is. Arden nodded once. Understood. She looked at him for a long beat, then stood. I'm checking on the girls, which left us alone. The silence that followed was not the same as the others. It had fewer knives in it. That did not make it easy. Arden spoke first. They're extraordinary. My throat tightened. I know. You raised them well. I let out the smallest breath. I know that too. He accepted the edge in it. I wasn't patronizing you. No. Just noticing 6 years late. His face changed, but only a little. He did not fight it. Then, softly, you have every right. I looked at him then. Really looked. There was no boardroom in him now. No billionaire armor. No audit posture. Just a man sitting in my living room with too much regret and not enough history to carry it anywhere useful. And because I was tired, because the truth had already cracked open so many rooms in the last 24 hours, I said what I had not planned to say. They needed stability more than they needed your name. His gaze held mine. And now they need honesty. He nodded once. Then that's what I'll give them. I wanted to believe him so badly it almost made me angry. The girls came running back before I had to answer. Lyra held a framed photo with both hands. Noemi carried another one against her chest. Careful, I said automatically. We are being careful, Lyra said, which usually meant the opposite, but today she meant it. They brought the photos to Arden. One was from the zoo last spring. The twins in sun hats grinning with blue ice pops. The other was from their first day of kindergarten. Backpacks square on their shoulders. Lyra beaming, Noemi solemn and brave. Arden took the frames like they were made of glass and breath. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed once, and this time it broke halfway through. Blue tongues, he murmured, staring at the zoo picture. They were not supposed to eat them before the picture, I said. Lyra corrected, We improved the picture. Noemi pointed to the other frame. I was scared that day. Arden looked at her. You don't look scared. That's because I was hiding it. He nodded like that fact belonged in a sacred text. He looked back down at the photos and I saw his hands tremble. Barely. But enough. Lyra saw it too. She looked at him, then at me, then back at him. And in a voice much quieter than her usual one, she asked, Are you gonna cry? The whole room held still. Arden set the frames carefully on the coffee table. Then he stood, took one slow step toward the girls, and stopped at a respectful distance. His eyes were wet now. Not almost, not maybe, wet. And when he spoke, there was nothing left of the man who had walked into my office with a file and a threat. I might. Noemi looked up at him with her soft, searching face. Why? His breath caught. Because this was it. The place no business skill could carry him through. The one room where truth had to show up barefoot. He lowered himself to his knees. Not dramatic. Not staged. Not some grand performance. Just a man dropping down because standing above them no longer fit the truth. He looked at Lyra. Then Noemi. Then both. And in a voice so wrecked it made my own chest ache, he said, Because I should have been there. And I wasn't. And I am so sorry. Neither girl moved right away. Neither did I. The house, the light, the whole ordinary afternoon seemed to gather around that one moment and hold it steady. Arden stayed on his knees. Noemi's lips parted, but no sound came out. Lyra looked like she was trying very hard to understand something too big for 6 years old and too important to brush away. And I knew, with that strange, terrible certainty mothers sometimes get, that the next thing either of my daughters said was going to matter for the rest of their lives. Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very seriously, That's a good start. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep my face steady. Because only Lyra could look at a grown man on his knees in my living room, eyes wet, voice broken, and answer him like she was chairing a very small, very strict review board. Arden gave the tiniest nod, like he understood that was not forgiveness. Not even close. Just permission to keep breathing in the room. Noemi stepped half a pace closer. Her voice was soft. Are you sorry because you missed us? Or because you hurt Mom? He looked at her like the question had reached straight into his ribs. Both, he said. And because those two things should never have been separate. That one landed on me too. Noemi studied his face with heartbreaking care, then asked, If you're sorry, does that mean you'll be kinder now? Arden swallowed. Yes. Lyra crossed her arms. Consistently. And I almost laughed again, because apparently my daughter intended to negotiate emotional accountability like a union rep. Arden nodded once. Consistently. Noemi tilted her head. Even when you're mad? Yes. Lyra narrowed her eyes. Even when people tell you no. That hit all of us. Arden looked at me for a fraction of a second, then back at her. Yes, he said again. The room stayed quiet after that. Not awkward. Not peaceful either. Just full. Full of too much truth, too much unfinished pain, too much beginning. Noemi looked down at her socks. I don't know if I'm supposed to hug you. My chest tightened. Arden did not move from his knees. You're not supposed to do anything, he said gently. Not unless you want to. That mattered. I felt it move through the room. Because the night before, I had told them they did not owe instant trust to anyone. Not because someone was family. Not because someone was sorry. Not because someone had money or power or a title that sounded important. And here he was, without knowing it, saying the same thing. Noemi seemed to feel the truth of that. She nodded once, small and serious. Lyra, after all her courtroom energy, did something I did not expect. She walked forward first. Not all the way. Just enough to stand close in front of him and say, You really messed this up. Arden let out one broken breath of what might have been a laugh if it had not hurt so much. Yes, he said. I really did. She looked at him for one more long second. Then she stepped into him. It was not a dramatic run. Not some movie moment with swelling music and instant healing. It was cautious, small, almost practical. like she had decided he could have one piece of grace and she intended to supervise it personally. Arden's whole body seemed to go still around the fact of her. He did not grab, did not pull her close too fast. He just put his arms around her with the care of a man handling something holy and breakable at the same time. Noemi watched. Then, because her heart had always been the softer one, she went too. And suddenly both girls were there. Both of them in his arms. And Arden Cole, billionaire, strategist, man who used to walk into rooms like the air owed him room to expand, bowed his head over my daughters and cried. Not loudly, not neatly either. Just the kind of crying that comes out when grief finally loses the fight to stay expensive and polished. Celeste turned away first. Not because she was hiding emotion, because some moments are private even when you are standing right there. I stayed where I was, one hand pressed flat over my own ribs, because something in me had gone painfully, unexpectedly tender. Not toward him. I need that to be clear. Toward the truth of the moment. Toward the fact that my daughters were meeting their father in the raw center of his regret, not the hard shine of his ego. Toward the fact that they would one day remember this. Not the audit file, not the office lobby, not the years he missed because they had been too young to know they were being missed. They would remember that when he finally stood in front of them with the truth, he did not stand over them. He knelt. After a while, Lyra pulled back first. Not because she was done feeling. Because she was still Lyra. She wiped at his face with the blunt practicality of a child and said, "You are very leaky." That did it. A real laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Celeste covered her mouth. Even Noemi smiled. Arden actually laughed too, though it broke halfway through. That seems accurate. Noemi still had one arm around his shoulder. Do dads cry a lot? Some do, he said. Good, Lyra replied. Because if you never cried, I'd think you were fake. Arden nodded with total seriousness. Noted. He stayed kneeling until they stepped back on their own. Then he rose slowly, like the floor itself had changed meaning under him. Noemi went back to the rug. Lyra took her old spot by the coffee table but kept sneaking little glances at him. Not soft exactly, but no longer sharp in the same way. There is a difference between a child deciding not to hate you and a child deciding you may remain in the room. He had earned the second. The first was still far away. And maybe that was right. Noemi looked at the framed zoo photo again, then up at him. If you come again, we can show you the birdhouse we painted. Arden's face changed all over again. That simple offer. That tiny future tense. If you come again. Not when. It humbled him in real time. I'd like that, he said quietly. Lyra lifted one finger. No disappearing. His eyes found hers. No disappearing. And no being mean to mom in buildings. That almost ended me. Arden answered without hesitation. Never again. Celeste made a very low sound from the sofa that translated roughly to I will be monitoring this. I stood up then because if I sat any longer, I might let the whole room forget that tenderness and trust were not the same thing. And this story was not finished just because we had reached the part that looked good from outside. Girls, I said gently, why don't you go wash up for lunch? Lyra looked immediately suspicious. Because grown-up talk. Yes. Unfair. Yes. Noemi stood first. Can we have the triangle grilled cheese? You can. That helps, she said. They wandered toward the kitchen with Celeste behind them, though Lyra stopped halfway down the hall, turned back, and pointed at Arden like a tiny prosecutor making a final statement. We have very strong memories. I believe that, he said. Then they were gone, and it was just us again. The shift in the room was immediate. Not hostile. Not warm either. Simply adult. Heavy in a different way. Arden stayed standing for a second, then looked at the doorway where the girls had disappeared. I don't even know how to stand after that. I crossed my arms because my body still needed the shield. Then sit. He sat. I stayed standing for one beat longer, then took my chair again across from him. For a minute, neither of us spoke. He looked wrecked. Not elegantly wrecked. Not movie star sad. Just stripped raw. Finally he said, You were right. I let that sit there. About what? About respect. He looked down at his own hands. About what it costs when it's missing. The quiet after that was almost unbearable. Because a sentence like that was too late. Because it was true. Because both things can exist at once. You had money when you hurt me, I said. You had power, access, influence. The kind of life people think can protect them from consequences. And none of it taught you how to treat people with basic care. He looked up at me. I kept going because this was the part that mattered. The part too many stories soften because the tears have already happened and the audience thinks the moral has landed. It hadn't. Not yet. You walked into my office with a file in your hand and thought you could still do what men like you always do. Apply pressure. Create fear. Find a weak spot. Make me defend the life I built after surviving you. I leaned forward slightly. And then my daughters walked in, and suddenly your money could not fix your timing. Could not buy back 6 years. Could not make them trust you just because your last name is expensive. He did not interrupt once. Good. I wanted every word to hit clean. That is the whole lesson, Arden. Not just for you. For every man who mistakes status for character. Respect matters more than wealth. Always. You lost us while you had billions. So don't you ever stand in front of me and act like money was the thing that could have saved this. The room went completely still. He took that in without defense. Then, after a long moment, he nodded. Yes. Not dramatic. Not resistant. Just yes. And somehow that was the most honest he had sounded in years. He glanced toward the kitchen again, where we could faintly hear Lyra arguing that triangles were the superior emotional shape for lunch. Then he looked back at me. I don't expect forgiveness from you. No. No, he nodded once. But I am asking for a chance with them. I held his gaze. This was the dangerous part. Not the apology. Not the crying. Not the kneeling. The asking. Because that was real life. That was calendars and boundaries and trust built in teaspoons, not floodwaters. That was the part stories usually skip because it is not glamorous. It is just hard. You do not get to rush them, I said. I won't. You do not get to buy them. His mouth twitched once. Not quite pain, not quite irony. I know. You do not get to use guilt to make them move faster than their own hearts can. I won't. And if you raise your voice at them, pressure them or make this about your pride, you are done. That one went in hard. But he nodded. All right. I studied him. The man I had once married would have negotiated every line. Pushed, challenged, looked for space to reclaim authority. This man just sat there and accepted terms that should have humiliated him. Maybe because he had already been humiliated by the only people whose judgment he could not manipulate. Maybe because fatherhood had finally arrived too late to flatter him and early enough to save something. Maybe because grief had done in 24 hours what money had never done in 40 years. I did not know, and I no longer needed to know everything before acting. You can come on Sundays, I said. For now. Here. In this house. A few hours. No surprises. No extra people. No talk of taking them anywhere until they're ready. He stared at me like he was not sure he had heard right. That's more than I deserve. Yes. That landed, too. I did not soften it. Because boundaries are not cruelty. Not for women like me. Not after men like him. He gave the smallest nod. Thank you. I almost corrected him. It was not mercy. It was management. But maybe management can be merciful when children are involved. The girls came back in before either of us said anything else. Lyra carried half a sandwich in one hand and moral authority in the other. Did the grown-up talk get annoying? Yes, I said. She nodded like she expected nothing less. Noemi climbed back onto the rug and ate carefully. All small thoughtful bites and sideways glances. The room had changed for them too. Not safer exactly. More knowable. That matters to children. They can survive a lot better with truth than with confusion. Arden stayed another 20 minutes. No more than that. Long enough to learn that Lyra named all her stuffed animals after scientists except one, who was named Pancake because she liked contrast. Long enough to hear Noemi explain why thunder was less scary if someone counted between lightning and sound. long enough to promise he would bring pictures of their brother next time, but only if they wanted to see them. They said yes, softly, carefully, but yes. When he finally stood to leave, the whole house seemed to notice. Noemi asked, "Are you coming back Sunday?" It hit him all over again. "Yes," he said, "if that's okay with you." She nodded. Lyra, because she was still herself, pointed one finger at him again and said, "Remember, strong memories." He gave her the faintest smile. "I'm counting on it." He turned to me at the door. For 1 second we were back in the hardest part of all of it. Not strangers, not lovers, not enemies exactly either. Something messier, more permanent. Parents now, whether either of us had planned it like this or not. "I'll send what they need," he said. "Medical history, family information, anything useful. Email it." "I will." He hesitated. Then, quietly, "Morel." I waited. "There is no version of this where I don't know what you carried." I kept my face still, because if I let every truth in at the same time, I would drown in them. "So carry it differently now," I said. His eyes held mine. Then he nodded once and stepped out onto the porch. I closed the door softly behind him. And that was that. Not the end of the story. Not even close. Real endings almost never arrive when the dramatic scene does. They arrive in what follows. In the repeated choice. In whether someone keeps showing up after the apology stops sounding beautiful. But even so, I stood there with my hand on the doorknob and let myself feel one thing fully. He had not won. That mattered. The billionaire ex-husband who once demanded a divorce like my heart was a loose item on his schedule, had come back thinking he still understood power. He thought he could step into my office, tear apart my work, and make me feel small in the life I had built from the ashes of his disrespect. Instead, he had ended up on his knees in my living room, asking 2 6-year-old girls for forgiveness he had not earned. That was not revenge. Revenge is hungry. This felt cleaner than that. This felt like truth finally catching up to money and refusing to bow. By evening, the house had settled again. The girls were in pajamas. Celeste had finally gone home after making me promise to text if Arden so much as breathed wrong over email. The dishes were done. The hallway light was low. I checked on Lyra first. She was half asleep already, sprawled sideways with one hand under her cheek and all the authority drained out of her for the night. Noemi was still awake. Of course she was. She always needed a little more time when the day had been too big. I sat on the edge of her bed. She looked at me in the dark and whispered, "Do you think he meant it?" I knew exactly what she meant. The sorry, the tears, the promise not to disappear. The way he had looked at them like he had found something he did not know he had been starving for. I brushed her curls back gently. "I think he meant it," I said. She nodded. Then, after a pause, "Do you forgive him?" There it was. The question only children can ask with enough innocence to make adults tell the truth or feel ashamed for dodging it. I looked at the little shape of her under the blanket. Then I answered the only way I could. Not all at once. She seemed to understand that. Maybe not fully, but enough. "That makes sense," she murmured. I kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. Downstairs, I stood for a long time in the quiet kitchen, looking out the window over the dark yard. A year from now, maybe the shape of our lives would look different. Maybe Sundays would become easier. Maybe James would meet his sisters. Maybe Arden would prove that remorse can mature into responsibility if it is made to do enough work. Or maybe not. Maybe he would fail. Maybe the old arrogance would crawl back in once the shock wore off and the missing years turned from grief into inconvenience. That was the truth, too. Tears are not character. Regret is not repair. And money, no matter how much of it a man has, cannot buy his way past the part where he has to become trustworthy in ordinary time. But as I stood there in the house I had made safe, with my daughters sleeping upstairs and the last of the day finally quieting around me, I knew one thing with total certainty. He would never again mistake my peace for weakness. He would never again mistake my softness for surrender. And he would never again walk into a room I built and think his wealth made him the most powerful person in it. Because now there were two little girls in this story with strong memories, sharp questions, and a mother who had already survived the worst of him once. And if he wanted a place in their lives, he would have to earn it the slow way, the human way, the respectful way. That was the consequence. That was the mercy. And that was the part men like Arden Cole always learn too late. If this story resonates with you, subscribe and support this channel. Truly, stories like this are for everybody who had to rebuild after disrespect, for everybody who learned the hard way that peace has a price, and for everybody who still believes dignity should win in the end. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and it means more than you know. Comment below and tell me honestly, did Morel do the right thing by protecting her daughters the way she did? And if you were Lyra and Noemi, would you have forgiven him that day? Because one thing is certain, respect matters more than wealth. Every single time.